Hi everyone and welcome back to WARNO. Today I'm going to build a second Panzer Grenadier Division deck. The reason for that is I haven't done one on video yet, and although I do have a deck, this is probably going to end up a little bit different to that, but I also want to take the opportunity to discuss some of the reasons for my choices and what each unit is capable of and why it might be chosen over other units, because I've been getting a lot of comments on my videos recently asking why people choose this unit over this unit, etc, etc. So I will try and cover some of that as to my reasons why I would do that. Now, everyone will have different reasons and have different preferences. Some people love artillery, for example. I think it's quite weak in the game, so I don't tend to prioritize it. But let's get down to building the deck and see where we get to. So the first thing is you have to take into consideration in any deck is the command vehicle you're going to take. You're going to need to take more than one command. That is not up for negotiation. You cannot just take one card of command. You're going to end up taking some logistics command, some infantry command, and probably a tank commander. The reason for that is that you will want plenty of them to capture points, because inevitably something is going to destroy one of them and you will need to replace it. The other thing is there are going to be situations where you are maybe in a city point and you want to put infantry in a building, and therefore you will want an infantry commander. Or you might be in a place where you are near the front lines and you want to use a tank commander. And remember that commanders also upgrade your units, so they will push them up to the next veterancy level, giving them additional benefits. So, let's have a look at the options here. So, a common one that most people take is the Iltis. This is just a little jeep. It has less than one front, side, rear and top armor. It is very weak, but it is only 100 points. Now, the advantage to taking this over, say, the Sultan, and if we just pin it, we can have a look at the difference. So the Sultan is also 100 points. The issue with the Sultan is, firstly, you only get 3 of them on a card, whereas you get 4 of the Iltis. So that means that if you somehow manage to lose 3 of them, which is perfectly possible if people are going out of their way to target those command units, which they will, then you will have an extra one to bring in. The other reason is speed. And you will notice that the Iltis is considerably faster, both on road and off-road. At the bottom there, you'll see it says speed and road speed. And the Iltis is simply faster, which means that it can also get out the way faster if units do get near it and you realize. It can also drive further, 15 kilometers, whereas you've only got 5 kilometers for the Sultan. Now, the Sultan does have more front and side armor. But the reality is this. It only has 10 health. Its max damage capability is 10 health. Any unit that gets near it is going to pretty much kill it in one shot from an RPG. A helicopter is going to kill it in one shot from an ATGM. And it's going to get destroyed in one bombardment from a jet dropping cluster bombs. Or potentially even HE bombs. The additional armor isn't that much benefit for the situations you're going to get yourself in. Someone asked me about artillery hitting these things. Wouldn't you rather take one with slightly more armor for artillery? Artillery isn't the be-all and end-all in this game right now. It needs some adjustment. It needs dispersion adjustment, which means that the closer you are to the artillery, the tighter the dispersion should be, like it is in the other Eugen games, but for some reason it isn't here yet. And right now, it just doesn't pose enough of a threat for me to think, well, the extra armor's worth it. Not to mention, the top armor's still only 1. If it takes a direct hit from an artillery piece, it should technically die anyway. So, in that situation, if you're talking about artillery hitting these things, then really you want to be taking a tank which has better top armor. So, for me, that's why I would take the Iltis. It's cheap, you get more availability in a game, and it's faster. And those 3 things, for me, just make a difference. And the armor value, you know, between 2 and less than 1 here, it's just not enough of a difference for the things that I would be using to kill my enemy's CVs. If I get a squad of infantry near it, it's going to die in 1 hit anyway. So it doesn't really make a difference. You also have things like the Fuchs, which is obviously pretty fast. It's, you know, very similar to the Iltis. It's a little bit slower off-road. Now, that is slightly more expensive. It's got 1 arm across the board. Now, the one thing it does have over the Iltis is it does have a little machine gun, so it can defend itself slightly. But again, if anything gets in range, it's still going to die. And you only get 3 of them. And again, you've got the M577 GA2, which again has some armor, but it's really slow. 59 kilometers an hour across ground. It's just not good enough for, you know, it's just not high enough speed, and again, the armor's not going to make a huge amount of difference. So I would take the Iltis. So I'm going to add the Iltis to this deck, and that's the reasoning why. You might feel differently, and that's fine. But this is why I would take the Iltis. Now, in terms of supply, there's an ongoing debate over how you should do this. Do you take the more supply for the least cost, or do you take the more availability of supply? Now, the trucks here have 500 supply in them, and they cost 15. And the armored vehicles have 500 supply, and they cost 20. Now, the armored ones will, again, yes, they'll take maybe a little bit more damage from an artillery piece, but honestly, right now, because of the way the game is, and the fact that you'll potentially want supply in multiple places, you're probably better off taking the smaller truck than, for example, the big Mancat 6x6 truck. So this one obviously has 1,750 supply, but you only get 3 of them. That means you can only put them in 3 places. Now, yes, you could take 2 stacks and have 6 in total. So I can add 6, 6. So I add them twice. There's 2 cards. I've got 6. Now that's great, but if they get destroyed, you've lost a lot of supply. And that's still only 6 you can call in over the entire game. Whereas you might have, 10 points on the map that you need some supply at. So it means you're being a little bit more restricted in where you can send supply. So my advice actually is, although it will work out slightly more costly in terms of points, I would take 2 stacks of these trucks at the moment. You could take the armored if you are so inclined, but you're paying an extra 5 points for a tiny bit of armor, and the reality is you're going to drain these things and then ditch them somewhere at the back of the map, because at that point they're useless. So I personally would just take these little trucks. They're cheap, they're cheerful, and they do the job you need them to do. You shouldn't be getting them too close to the enemy, hopefully. They should be, slightly further back out of harm's way, just regenning your troops and resupplying everything. The other option that some people go for is the chopper. Now, I would avoid these choppers like the plague. Choppers are expensive. They carry 2,000 supply, which is a lot. But the reality is they're easy to shoot down. They're a great target for the enemy, and I mean, people do go out of their way to go for these, especially, back in Wargame Red Dragon, they are a prime target because they are so expensive and they have so much supply. So people do go out of their way to kill these. It's up to you. I prefer not to take choppers like this, the same as I prefer not to take command choppers, because for me, they're at high risk of being destroyed by anti-air defenses or planes or artillery. They can basically be attacked by everything in the game, whether they're landed or, in the air. That makes a difference. But personally, I tend to avoid them because of the cost. Let's move on to infantry. So infantry is something that is very available in this deck. You get a lot of choices, and you can go about this a few different ways. I tend to take all my units, where possible, as veteran. So that's the second tier here, experienced veteran. You can also take trained, and you can also take elite with some, depends on the unit. I like to take veteran because it's sort of a nice balance between everything else. And then if they are near a commander, they are boosted all the way up to elite. Now at the moment, units can be stunned and have their cohesion dropped. Cohesion is basically like their ability to fight, if you will, their will to fight and all of that jazz. If that drops too low, they'll rout, etc, etc. They'll run away from the battle. So taking veteran negates that a bit. They have a little bit more stress resistance, plus 25%. If you go to elite, it's plus 50%. But yeah, that's an option you can and ah between. But there are certain situations where I wouldn't take veteran. And this squad that I've got selected is actually one of them. So Pioneers are fantastic units because right now they are in some ways broken as hell. So Pioneers have satchel charges. They act like a grenade. Satchel charges do an incredible amount of damage to infantry. They have a massive blast radius. When you drop them on a squad, the squad will die in 1 or 2 hits depending on the strength of that squad, aka how many troops it has in the squad. You have to be within 175 meters, but all you have to do with Pioneers is run them at the enemy. You don't do an attack move with them, you just charge them through the enemy lines, and they will throw their satchel charges left, right and centre and kill everything in their path. They are ridiculously devastating. They recently changed all of the other units, for example, the Pioneer Flams or the Hand Flam Patron, to need to be stationary to fire. They have to be stood still to fire their flamethrower. But they didn't do that to the Pioneers. The Pioneers can still throw the satchel charges on the move. Now, if you take them as veteran, you only get 6. If you take them as trained, you get 9 of them. And the reality is, I don't care how accurate their guns are. I don't care about their cohesion. All I care about is the satchel charges. And those things don't really miss because of their explosion. So I would take trained of those, and I would take them in the cheapest vehicle you can, because it really doesn't matter. Let me unpin this so we're not clicking all the time. Just take them in the little Unimog, it's fine. Simple as that. So we got 9 of those. We can only take 1 stack, but you should have them in your deck. They are that good. Then you want the Hand Flam Patrons, the Pioneer Flams, because they're really good as well. And again, you've got the Hand Flam Patron, which is the most important part of this unit. Now, if you take them as veteran, you only get 4. Much like the satchel charges, honestly, the accuracy bonus here, it goes up to 46%, but, you know, they have a wide blast radius. They're flame troops. I would just take them in the same vehicle, and I'd take 6. Again, personal choice. You might feel differently, and that's fine. But these units, I don't care if they die. I just want them to do as much damage as possible before they do. There are other units which I will take at a higher rank or higher veterancy because I don't want them to die and I want them to survive for longer. And that's things like the Panzer Grenadiers. Now, let's start at the top and just work our way down. Now we've covered the 2 sort of most important anti-infantry units in my opinion. So you got the Field Jaeger, which are basically an MP5 squad. There's only 4 of them. They are nothing special. I wouldn't bother with them. The Sicherungs are very nice spammable infantry. They are cheap. They come in a huge stack of 12 because they're not even trained. They are just bog standard infantry. They have poor experience, so they actually get negative effects. However, they are good for absorbing fire, and they are good for shooting enemy infantry. They have a lot of rifles. They're nothing special. But they are good fillers if you want to just do some damage. But we'll come back to those. Then you've got the M40A1, which is a recoilless rifle. I'm not a big fan, mostly because of the shooting rate of fire. The rate of fire here is 4. I can increase that to 5 by increasing them to veteran. But they just fire too slowly for me to feel they're of use, so I would skip them. Now, when it comes to commanders in this deck, you have a few choices. You have the Pioneer Fuhr, which come with Uzis and a Carl Gustav. They're a squad of 5. You have the Panzer Grenadiers, which come in a squad of 6. They're a bit more expensive, but they have a Red Eye and a Panzerfaust, as well as some G3A4s. And then you have the FS Jägerfuhr. Now, the FS Jägerfuhr are FS, so they can actually be spawned forward on the field of battle. That means that they are, you know, one of these forward deployment squads that can be forward deployed along with your recon. Now, previously, I always took the Panzer Grenadiers because they had some anti-air defense and they had a Panzerfaust, and I would still highly recommend that, because it means they have some capability to defend themselves against chopper attacks. They're still probably going to die, but if they're in a building, they stand a little bit of a chance of doing some damage and potentially killing a chopper. However, right now, on some of the maps, you cannot pass up the opportunity to get some advanced points by putting down an FS Jägerfuhr. And they're pretty cheap. You still get 6, they just don't come with anything other than rifles. So personally right now, I would take those. I'd take them in the Unimog again, just the little truck. personal preference. With the infantry commanders, most of them only come with 3. The only change to that is the Jägerfeuer, which are basically just a different version of the FS Jägerfeuer. These guys obviously have the Carl Gustaf, but there's actually less of them. There's only 4 of them in a squad instead of the 6 that you get up here. But they're a little bit more expensive because of the Carl Gustaf. Now, in terms of other units, you also have the option of the FS Jäger. Obviously, again, these are forward deployment squads. Again, it's up to you if you fancy taking these. They do have the Panzer Force 3, which is obviously pretty good. Decent penetration at 21. The Jäger don't get that. The standard Jäger, and they cost the same. They only come in as trained as well. These guys come in as elite. I'd, again, stick those in, because it just gives you that option at the moment, while it's still the way it is, to forward deploy these units. Of the other units available, we obviously have the Milans, and you can actually forward deploy Milans. So for an extra 5 points, you get forward deployable Milans. Accuracy is either 50 at trained or 57% at veteran. Frankly, I'd take these as veteran. It's only a little increase in accuracy, but it'll make all the difference for these guys. And if they do kill something, they'll rank up to elite pretty quickly. And really, at the start of the game, are you going to bring in more than 4? The answer is probably not. But they give you a little bit of advanced anti-tank. Unfortunately, what you don't have with all this advanced stuff is anti-chopper capability or anti-bomber. But let's stick those guys in, because this means we have a commander, normal infantry, and FS Milans we can sort of deploy ahead of everything else. Now, another good unit is the Pioneer Armbrust. Now, their penetration isn't the best. It's only 13. However, its rate of fire is 20. That's double that of any other infantry squad with a standard Panzer Force. They're only ever 10. So this is a huge bonus. They fire very quickly. So in a forest situation where they are up close and personal with a tank and can perhaps get a side shot or run round beside them or behind them and get a rear shot, then you're talking about outputting a lot of damage very quickly, and obviously they'll do a lot of damage to small vehicles in a matter of seconds. So that's well worth it. I quite like that squad, so I would take them. I would probably take them as veteran, just to again give them a little bit more accuracy on the armbrust. And their other weapons as well, you know, they have an MG3, they have a machine gun, which is good. Now, if you want to take them in a Fuchs Milan, you could. I mean, you know, a mass spam of Milans is never a bad thing. They do a lot of damage. Bear in mind that it is only the Milan 1, but it's still decent. It does mean you're paying more for that squad, though. So I just bring them in, personally, in the Unimog. Then you have Panzer Grenadier squads. Now, the Panzer Grenadier squads are probably the best infantry you get. They come in either as a 6-man squad, a 9-man squad, or a 5-man squad in a Marder. Now, obviously, the more infantry you have, the longer they survive, so a 9-man squad obviously beats out the others. You have a choice of either a simple M113 or your basic truck. The reality is I'd bring these guys in a basic truck. I'd switch them to veteran, because these are your reasonably effective infantry. You know, these are a good squad to have. So I'm going to take those guys. And then you also have the option of these guys with the Carl Gustaf. Now, the issue that these guys have more than anything else is that they are a smaller squad. They're only 6-man, but they can come in and Marder. You have the Marder 1A2 and you have the Marder 1A3. The Marder 1A3 has decent armor. It's on par with the BMP3. Its gun isn't as good. It's only a 20mm, but it's not bad. The Marder 1A2 is basically the same, other than, you know, the armor is better on the 1A3 variant. The guns are the same. So this is up to you. I would actually definitely bring some Marders. And you could even just bring the Panzer Grenadier Marders, this one here, because they do have the option of bringing in a Marder with a Milan. Now, Milans are obviously very useful. They only come with the standard Milan, so if you're using it for the Milan, you could easily just bring the 1A2 Milan, because that's only 35 points, whereas the 1A3 is 40 points. And, you know, once it gets in tank range, it's going to take a lot of damage. So it's completely up to you. What I'd actually say is, These guys I'd potentially take in the Marder 1A3, which just means that you have the extra armor, and these guys are a slightly bigger squad by one man, and I would take them as veteran. And then I would probably even consider taking these guys, but this time I would take the Marder 1A2 with the Milan and use them for fire support at long range against tanks, because they will outrange most tanks. And again, we would take those as veteran. You could, of course, take something like the Jaeger, which aren't bad, but they only come in as trained. But they're good fillers. They have 11 men in their squad. But rather than spend a whole 4 activation points on that, let's move on. So artillery is where you can get up with some debate as to whether you like artillery or not. I've had not a huge amount of success with artillery. They can be annoying at times, but they're predictable pattern at the moment of fire means that it is easy to move units out of the way. Some people argue that, well, you're forcing people to move units. I would also then argue back. In a multiplayer game recently, for example, I was bombarded 3 times with artillery on my infantry that were in buildings before any of the buildings were destroyed or the infantry took much damage, and I didn't move any of those infantry out of those buildings. Basically, it didn't pose enough of a threat to me. What I would do is I would take some mortars. I wouldn't bother ranking them up, there's absolutely no point, but they're good for smoking, and, you know, I'm seeing more smoke being used in the game now, as you would expect from Wargame Red Dragon, perhaps more so. So get yourself some Panzer mortars. The mortars are good. They're going to do a little bit of damage to infantry and things in a forest, but infantry in towns and forests get bonuses to HE damage, blah, 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 blah. It's convoluted. Then you could take rocket artillery. Isn't terrible, but it's also not great. It doesn't do as much damage as it should probably, and it fires very slowly. The rockets are very slow, so for that reason it's very easy to avoid. If you see the rockets coming in, you can move your units preemptively out of the way. They're not ideal right now. And the Lars 2 is supposed to be anti-tank with cluster munitions, but I've never ever seen it be very effective at that job. Artillery still needs a rework. Let's leave it at that. If you want to take something, I would take some 109s personally, the 109A3s. The M110s aren't bad, but they have a very slow rate of fire. I'd take these guys. They have double the rate of fire. You get 3 of them, stick them in. If you really like rocket arty, take it, but look at the price of it. It's 400 points for one. That's an awful lot of money to spend on an artillery piece that your enemy is going to move out of the way of, or if their units are in buildings, just sit there and laugh at you as the rockets do nothing. So right now, if you're going to take something, take that, and at least it's a bit of harassment for stuff in forests. Don't expect to be doing huge amounts of damage to buildings. Let's move straight on to tanks. Now, tanks is a lovely time to bring up unit cards. So we've had a look at these unit cards on the screen for a few units and picked out little bits and pieces. What I want to say about Eugen games is the unit cards are a guide, but to some extent nonsense. So on paper, the M40, the M48, sorry, this little tank, looks terrible. These stats would make it seem atrocious. But in the actual game, it's pretty darn good. And this is a theme throughout Eugen's games. Their unit card stats aren't good at portraying how the unit will perform. The stats here are taken from various different sources in the game files, and I don't understand it all. I'm sure there's someone out there who does, especially someone at Eugen. But basically, it doesn't tell you everything. So yes, this unit quality is D, it is poor. Actually, for its price of 40 points, it is ridiculously good. If you can get up close and personal to enemy vehicles, it will do an immense amount of damage. Its accuracy isn't actually that bad, and you can even take out bigger tanks with it if you get in their face. So don't underestimate the quality of this tank. It will make people rethink pushing your lines. So I would actually take that. Whether you upgrade it to veteran is debatable. I mean, This is a cheap unit that is somewhat spammable because of its cost. I mean, look at it. It's cheaper than some infantry squads. I would take that, personally. The Leopard 1A1A1 is a really good tank, and again, it is pretty cheap. It's even better than the M48. And on paper, that fits. It does look better on paper. You get 8 of these things at Veteran as standard. Take it. They're great. The Striker is 80 points, which is quite reasonable for an ATGM vehicle, as some of them are ridiculously expensive. Its accuracy is pretty shocking, but it does a lot of damage. It has a long range, and that penetration of 23, as I say, is pretty good. I personally haven't really bothered very much with these anti-tank vehicles in WARNO, and I didn't bother with them hugely in Wargame Red Dragon either. So I would skip that personally, but that's a personal choice. You might have had more luck with them and find them quite useful. If you've got plenty of forward recon that are seeing enemy units at the edge of their lines, then this is probably quite beneficial because it will outrange their tanks. I like the Leopard 1A5, it is 80 points. It is a very good tank for 80 points, and this is something that will be fixed in an upcoming patch when they rebalance the tanks and the pricing. So I expect this to, if it stays the same, go up in price. But I would certainly have at least 1 card of those, if not 2. They are very worth it. The Leopard 2A3 is one of the best tanks in the game. I would always take it as Veteran and potentially have a command near it to rank it up to Elite. These things are devastating. You definitely want these in your deck. I like them so much, I'm going to take 2 stacks of those. I'm also going to take the Leopard 2A3 foot command tank, which is ridiculously expensive. Its command tanks are 100 points on top of the cost of the normal tank, as you can also see from the Leopard 1A5 for. It is 180 points compared to the Leopard 1A5 at 80 points. Now I have 3 activation points left here, and I am actually going to take another set of Leopard 1A5s, and I'm filling the entire tanks because they're so good in this deck. You wouldn't not fill the entire tanks. Let's have a look at Recon. You've got a lot of choices here. You have some new stuff which are Belgian/British really. You've got the Scorpion and you've got the Scimitar. Now, they only have good optics, which isn't ideal for a recon vehicle. However, they are quite good at putting out a reasonable amount of damage. They have decent HE damage. This has a machine gun and obviously a main cannon. And this thing has a 30mm auto gun. Pretty decent looking. Nice vehicle. Reasonable ranges, decent HE, good suppression. They're good vehicles, but the reality is the infantry are just better. You have the option of the Jäger Aufkul, which are a 4-man squad, the Éclairs, which are a 4-man squad. You have the Aufklärer, which are a 4-man squad, and then you have the Jäger Aufkul. The Jäger Aufkul, which aren't the FS variant, still spawn forward because they are recon. They are an 11-man squad. They take a lot of punishment. They have an MG3, they have 10 G3A4s, and they have a Panzerfaust. These are the best recon units in the game, almost. No, they're probably the best infantry recon in the game right now. The best recon unit in the game is probably the Bradley, but that's for other reasons. So right now, I would take these guys. When you're pushing a front line, right at the start of the game and you're in deployment, you can deploy your FS squads and you can deploy your recon. If you deploy these Jäger Aufkul along with your FS Milans and everything else, you can build an immensely strong front line for an expense. They are 90 points to bring in, but they are ridiculously good. Ridiculously. You also want more recon. The FS Jäger Aufkul are only a strength of 4, but they do have the Panzerfaust 3, which is obviously a lot of damage. If you can hit an enemy vehicle with that, even a tank, you're going to do a lot of damage. The Aufklärer don't have quite as much, and they're still only a 4-man squad, but you get more of them, unless you also bring them in as veteran. Veterancy isn't really a big deal when it comes to recon in this game. In Wargame Red Dragon, veterancy meant that they could spot what a unit was faster. Not necessarily that they could see further, but they could identify the unit faster. Here, that doesn't appear to be the case, so it doesn't really matter. So sometimes more is better. However, these guys are actually cheaper than the Aufklärer, and they have a worse weapon in my opinion. So I would take these guys. In an Iltis, they don't need to come in anything special. I mean, you could take them in the chopper if you so wished to get them behind enemy lines. That's not a bad option. But it does make them a lot more expensive. One of the best vehicles you have is the Fuchsradze. This has exceptional optics because it has a little radar on top. I'm not a huge fan of the radar vehicles or, you know, these exceptional vehicles in WARNO because I don't feel like they see as far as they did in Wargame Red Dragon. Now, that could be a psychological thing, I'm not entirely sure. Some people will tell you that they quite like them, and some people will tell you not to bother, they're not as good as they should be. I'll leave that up to you. I am going to add it to this deck because I've never actually played around with it. I wouldn't bother taking it ranked up. Take as many as you can, but I'll give it a go. I'll take it in the deck. The other option, of course, is your Recon Chopper, and again, this is up to you. It has very good optics, which is good. In my opinion, you don't want anything less than very good. So, I'm going to add that as well. I tend to lose them a lot, but, you know, they can come in handy. I might regret not taking more Recon Infantry, but we will see. Let's move on to anti-air. So, the 2nd Panzer Grenadiers have a weak spot, and that is their air defense. They only get the Jeopard, which is alright, but it's not the best anti-air. And it is radar, which means that it can be shot at by radar planes. You have to learn to micromanage and turn on and off its weapons. But since it's the only option you have, and you only get 2 of them if you bring them in at veteran, you're going to have to bring them in at trained, because you're going to need at least 4, and the chances are you're going to eventually lose 1 or 2 to a seed. So if you only take 2 as veteran, and even if you take 2 cards that's still only 4, then you're in trouble. So I would take 2 cards of those because it's all you can do, and then I would grab a squad of these guys. They aren't great, and if you take them as elite, they're still only 43% accuracy. If you take them as veteran, they're 40%, and if you take them as trained, you get 12 of them, but they are only 35%. You know what, I'm going to take them as veteran because you still get 8, so you could still fill a forest with them and a town, and you might scare someone off sending choppers or planes that direction, but don't expect anything special from that. But let's move on to helos. So another area that the Panzer Grenadiers are struggling is their helo choices. They have either the BO-10 PAH-1, which has the Hot 1, which is not a terrible missile, but not a great missile. Or they have the 1A1, which is the Hot 2, which is a better missile, and will do you a lot of damage versus tanks. But the reality is, you have the Leopard 2A3. You shouldn't really need another anti-tank, unless it's something you're sending behind enemy lines to snipe an enemy vehicle, enemy artillery, an enemy command vehicle, that sort of thing. I wouldn't bother adding any choppers to this deck, personally. If you like playing with choppers, if you like doing sneaky tactics like that, getting around the back, if you feel you have a lot of luck with them, then certainly take them. The Hot 2, for 10 points more, is worth it because it has more accuracy and it has better penetration. So yes, I can recommend that that is probably a good chopper, but it's just not one I'm going to take. Aircraft, on the other hand, you get a nice wide selection here. You get some British jets, which is great. So you get the Harrier, you get the Tornado F3, lovely to see. You also get the Tornado Seed. Of this deck, things that you're going to want to take straight away are the Tornado IDS MW1, which is the cluster bomber. Now, there's been a lot of confusion about the bomblets that it drops. Yes, it drops cluster bomblets, but they are HE bomblets, not anti-tank bomblets. They are fantastic at killing infantry in open ground, in forests, and in buildings. These are probably the best right now at killing infantry. So you definitely want that, and you want to take 2. Now, in the current patch, you have to be aware that these only drop half of their payload on a pass. So therefore, they will not automatically evac and will fly around and get shot down. So as soon as they drop, you need to evac it manually until they fix it so that it drops its entire payload again. I would also take the Tornado F3 as it is proven to be quite good anti-air. Now, in terms of accuracy, it does make a difference for missiles and things. You get the Sky Flash here, which is 7,000 meters, and if you increase it to Veteran, you do increase that to 57% accuracy, but you only get 1, so I would actually take the 2 and take the hit on the accuracy, because you're going to scare people off if nothing else. You also have the option of the Harrier GR3 anti-air, but it has a very bad turning circle. From what I've seen of it in game, not many people are bringing it in, put it that way, and it's quite expensive, and it doesn't have any long-range missiles, so I'd give that a miss. The Tornado GR1 seed is the only seed option you have, so if you want to bring in a seaplane, that's what you got to bring in. Now, when it comes to seed, accuracy does make a difference. However, if you bring in this Veteran, you only get 1 of them. So I'd take it as trained just so you have 2, because you might inevitably get 1 shot down. I have 48 points of 50, so I now have to make a decision of bringing 1 more aircraft or dropping something else in the deck to bring 2 more types of aircraft. We don't have a cluster bomber yet. Now, we have some of the best tanks in the game, but having an anti-tank jet and having cluster bombers is still very advantageous. So, there's the option of the IDS cluster, which has rock eyes, and it has 5 of them. There is also the option of the Tornado IDS anti-tank, which has Mavericks, which don't have the best accuracy. There is also a much cheaper anti-tank plane up here, which is the F-104G anti-tank. This actually has a really nice missile, but its accuracy is still pretty bad. Let's pin that and compare it to the Tornado. So Tornado IDS Maverick only has 26 penetration. The AS-30 has 30 penetration, which is obviously going to do a heck of a lot of damage if it hits. The problem is if it hits, we can increase its accuracy. Unpin that. We can increase its accuracy to 40% by taking it as Veteran, and 43% if we put it up to Elite. So taking it to Elite isn't really worth it. I'd be tempted to bring that in as Veteran, and then you get, you know, the same accuracy as the Tornado IDS for a much cheaper cost and a much higher penetration. Obviously, it's not as good of a jet. You have more chance of losing it, but, you know, it will kill a heavy tank very easily. So this one's up to you. You either bring a cluster or an anti-tank, in my opinion, because you've already got an MW1, which is better than any HE plane for killing infantry. However, it won't do much damage to vehicles, whereas a HE plane still has a chance of damaging vehicles. The other option is then that you bring an AT or a cluster, or you bring both and drop something else in the deck. And there is stuff you can drop. You could go back to Recon and drop the helicopters. You could go back to infantry and drop something, though I wouldn't advise it because infantry is very good in the game right now. You could drop that, but you only get 1 point back, so it's probably not worth it. Really, you'd be talking about dropping something from here, I think, because I think this was worth 2 points. Yes, it is. So you could drop the Razit and keep the chopper, and then you could bring in 2 aircraft instead. I'm not going to. I'm going to take both of those because I actually want to try out the Razit, and I might change that later. But what I'll do is, for these 2 activation points, I will try the anti-tank jet at its Veteran level and see how well it does against enemy vehicles. I might regret it and end up changing it for the cluster, but it's cheap, so it's worth a try. So that's the deck. Let's have a look. So in logistics, we went with the Iltis, for the reasons I explained then. We've got the Unimogs, because, again, they're cheap and effective, and there's plenty of them. Infantry-wise, we've got a large selection. You will notice, and I don't think I explained at the time, I brought most of my infantry in the simple transport trucks or the Iltis. The reason for this is you can sell all of these transport vehicles. Any transport vehicle without like an autocannon on it, so with little machine guns or whatever, can be sold. You get the money back. You could use them for scouting, as some people do. You can send them forward and use them as scouts. However, the option to sell them means that you get their cost back. And if I bring in 10 squads, and an Iltis is 15 points, I've just got 150 points back. That could be 3 more squads of infantry, etc, etc. So it's well worth doing that to get the money back. And you will see in the higher level games that a lot of players do that because they want more money back to buy more units. Artillery, I've kept it simple. I've got the Panzer mortar, which is your mortar for smoking more than anything else, and potentially doing a little bit of harassment, but I very rarely call them out. And again, I've gone for some basic artillery just for potential harassment. Tanks, we've got a wide selection. We've got the M48, we've got the Leopard 1A, 1A1, we've got the 1A5, we've got the 2A3, we've got the 2A3 Command, and another stack of 1A5s. Recon, we've gone for the Jäger Aufkl because they are an 11-man squad and they are ridiculously good right now. We also have the FS Jäger Aufkl because they're a reasonable squad and they have a decent Panzer Force 3, which the other squads don't get here. I've also taken the Fuchs Razzit because I want to try it, and I've got the Chopper because they're always handy to have. Anti-air wise, you are very limited in your choices. We've got the Gepard 1A, 1A1. I don't know why I want to say that, it's because of the tank. We've got the Gepard 1A1 even, and we've got a squad or a stack of Fliegerforst. They're terrible, but they're all we have. Helos, I'm not even bothering, but I can recommend that the Hot 2 is going to be good if you want a chopper that does anti-tank, but you are spending those 2 activation points on it. And for air, we have gone with the Tornado IDS MW1, which is the cluster bomblet for anti-infantry. I stress anti-infantry, not anti-vehicle. We've got the Tornado F3 for anti-air. We've got the Tornado GR1 Seed because it is the only seed plane option, and we've got the F104G AT because it is a cheap anti-tank plane that has a very strong missile at 30 penetration. The other option would be the cluster bombers, namely the Tornado IDS cluster, but that's a personal choice. You could take one or the other, or you could drop something somewhere else and take both. I also don't have any HE bombers, but you could opt for that as they will do damage to vehicles and infantry rather than just one or the other. Thanks very much for watching, everyone. Please like, share and subscribe. I hope this was helpful. I hope I've explained things reasonably well and in a not too convoluted way. It's always difficult with Eugen games because everything about the units and the unit stat cards is a bit convoluted, and that's why I haven't tried to talk in too much detail about what's on those cards, because it's not the be-all and end-all. It doesn't necessarily represent how the unit will perform truly on the battlefield. You will notice that I've picked units that I like, that I have used, and also ones that are quite often used by the tournament players, the people who are in the ranked ladder, etc, etc. There's a theme to why I choose these, not just from my own gameplay, but from how I see those other players perform. If you have any questions about units and things, please do ask them below. I will try and answer, or someone else might come along and help answer as well. I wouldn't claim to be the expert know-it-all. I'm just trying to help people understand a bit better. Thanks very much for watching, everyone. I'm sorry this has probably turned into a long one. I haven't even looked at the recording time, but I do hope it has been reasonably helpful. And obviously these ideas can translate into other decks and other unit types. Thanks for watching. Have a great week.